If you are here, you already know something most people don't. You know that karma is not punishment. You know that your relationships were not accidents. You know that the delays in your life were not failures. They were preparation. You know that your soul is not drifting. It is evolving. Part 1 gave you the laws that govern the journey. But there is a deeper layer, because understanding the laws is only the beginning. What comes next is learning how to live inside them, consciously, deliberately, and without the exhausting weight of a soul that is fighting against its own blueprint. In this audiobook, we go further. We go to the law that sits beneath every other law you have ever encountered. The one the ancient traditions called the first truth. The one that, once understood, changes not just how you see your life, but how you see every soul you have ever loved, every enemy you have ever made, and every mirror the universe has ever held up to your face. We go to the root, and everything, every law, every lesson, every seemingly random turn of fate begins to make a different kind of sense. There is a question that the human mind, left to its own devices, will never stop asking. Why? Why did this happen to me? Why did they leave? Why did I lose what I loved? Why does the same pain keep returning no matter how far I run from it? Why, if the universe is as ordered and intelligent as the ancient traditions insist, does so much of life feel arbitrary, isolating, and cruel? Part 1 gave you tools to begin answering that question. The law of vibration showed you that everything you experience is a frequency being reflected back to you. The law of karma showed you that every cause has a corresponding effect encoded in the Akashic field across lifetimes. The law of divine timing showed you that the delays were never empty, they were preparation. The law of soul contracts showed you that the most significant people in your life were not strangers to your soul. And the law of free will showed you that even within a written blueprint, your choices carry sovereign and irreducible power. But here is what all of those laws share. Here is the thread that runs through every single one of them, the ground from which each of them grows, the truth without which none of them fully make sense. They are all expressions of one thing. And that one thing is what this chapter is about. What the records reveal at their deepest layer. When trained Akashic readers access the records with sufficient depth, not skimming the surface of a single lifetime, but moving into the full vibrational history of a soul across its entire arc of incarnations, they consistently describe arriving at something that language struggles to contain, beneath the individual records, beneath the soul contracts and the karmic patterns and the vibrational signatures, beneath the specific blueprints of specific lifetimes, there is a field, and within that field, there is no separation, not as a spiritual ideal, not as a comforting metaphor, but as a literal structural reality of how the Akashic field is actually organized. Every soul's record exists within the same field. Every vibrational impression ever made by any consciousness that has ever lived is held within the same infinite medium. The ancient Sanskrit term Akasha, the ether, the fifth element, the invisible substance from which all other elements emerge, was never understood by the Vedic tradition as a container that holds separate things. It was understood as the living substance that all things are made of. The distinction is not subtle. It is everything. A container holds objects that are fundamentally separate from each other and from the container itself. But a medium, a living, intelligent, responsive medium like the Akashic field, does not hold its contents at a distance. It permeates them. It is them. The wave is not separate from the ocean that produces it. The ray is not separate from the sun that generates it. And the soul, your soul, every soul that has ever drawn breath in any form across any lifetime, in any corner of this universe, is not separate from the field that records it. This is the law of oneness, and the Akashic tradition is unanimous across every culture, every era, every lineage that has ever accessed the records with genuine depth. Separation is the great illusion. The hermetic root. The hermetic tradition, one of the oldest and most carefully preserved streams of Akashic wisdom in the Western world, expressed this law through what the Kabbalion, the foundational hermetic text, calls the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Now, this has been badly misunderstood by modern readers who hear it as a claim that reality is imaginary, that the physical world is an illusion to be dismissed. That is not what the Hermetic philosophers meant. What they meant was something far more precise and far more profound. The all, the infinite, unbounded, intelligent consciousness that underlies all of existence, does not stand apart from creation and observe it from the outside. Creation happens within it. Every galaxy, every lifetime, every thought, every soul is a movement of consciousness within consciousness. The way a dream happens within the mind of the dreamer, not outside of it. The dreamer and the dream are not the same. The individual soul retains its individuality, its unique vibrational signature, its specific evolutionary journey. But they are not separate. They cannot be, because there is only one medium, one field, one living intelligent substance in which all of this is occurring. The Vedic tradition expressed the same truth through the concept of Brahman, the infinite consciousness that is the ground of all being, and Atman, the individual soul. And the most radical, most liberating teaching of the Upanishads, the ancient texts that form the philosophical heart of Vedic wisdom, is this: Atman is Brahman. The individual soul, at its most fundamental level, is not a fragment of the infinite. It is not a spark that was separated from the fire. It is the fire knowing itself through the experience of appearing to be a spark. The Egyptian mystery schools taught this through the concept of the divine Ka, the immortal soul that was understood not as a possession of the individual, but as a direct expression of the divine intelligence moving through individual form. To know yourself in the Egyptian initiatory tradition was not a psychological exercise. It was a cosmic one. Know thyself meant know what you actually are beneath the appearance of separateness. And what you actually are, the Akashic tradition teaches without exception, is not an isolated point of consciousness, adrift in an indifferent universe. You are a movement of the universe knowing itself. Why this changes everything about karma. Here is where the law of oneness becomes not just philosophically beautiful, but practically transformative, because it reframes the entire architecture of karma in a way that the law of cause and effect, taken alone, cannot fully illuminate. In part 1, we established that karma is not punishment. It is the law of cause and effect, operating with perfect precision across lifetimes. Every cause generates an effect. Every action produces a consequence. The field records everything and reflects it back with absolute consistency. But here is the question that the law of oneness answers. Who is the effect returning to? If separation is real, if the soul that generated a cause in a previous lifetime is genuinely, fundamentally separate from the soul experiencing the effect in this one, then karma starts to look, even when stripped of its punitive framing, like an external mechanism, something the universe does to you across time. But if oneness is the deeper truth, if the field is not a collection of separate souls interacting with each other, but a single consciousness knowing itself through the experience of apparent multiplicity, then karma is not something the universe does to you. It is something you do to yourself. Not the small personality level you that woke up this morning and made breakfast, but the deeper, vaster soul level you that has been moving through incarnations across the full arc of cosmic time. the person you harmed in a previous lifetime, and the soul that carries the karmic imprint of that harm into this one are, at the level of the Akashic field, the same consciousness moving through different expressions of itself. This is not a comforting abstraction. It is a precise description of the energetic mechanics of how karma actually operates. And when it is understood at this level, something remarkable happens to the human experience of guilt, of resentment, of the exhausting human habit of dividing the world into those who wronged us and those we wronged. All of it begins to dissolve. Not because harm doesn't matter, but because at the level of the field, there is no other. There is only consciousness, encountering the effects of its own causes, learning through the full embodied experience of both sides of every equation it has ever generated. The mirror that never lies. The Akashic tradition offers a teaching that appears across virtually every lineage that has worked deeply with the records, and it is one of the most unsettling and most liberating teachings in the entire body of cosmic law. The soul you find it hardest to forgive is the soul you are most deeply connected to. Not because difficult relationships are spiritually superior to easy ones, but because the intensity of your reaction to another soul is a precise measurement of the vibrational resonance between you. And vibrational resonance, in a field where all things are expressions of one consciousness, means that what you are reacting to in them is something you carry within yourself. This is not the same as saying that what they did to you was acceptable. It is not a framework for dismissing harm or collapsing the legitimate boundaries of individual experience. It is something more precise than that. It is saying that the Akashic field uses relationship, all relationship, but especially the most charged and difficult ones, as a mirror. And what the mirror shows you is never truly about the other person. It is always, at the deepest level, a message from the field to the soul, about what remains unresolved, unintegrated, and unloved within itself. The hermetic tradition called this the principle of correspondence operating at the level of consciousness, as within, so without. What you encounter persistently in your external world is a direct correspondence to what the field is holding in your vibrational record. And in a universe governed by oneness, the outer world cannot show you anything that isn't, at the level of the field, already yours. Oneness as a practical Akashic technology. Understanding the law of oneness is not simply a matter of intellectual agreement with a spiritual concept. The ancient traditions were unanimous that oneness, like every cosmic law, only becomes real through direct experience. And direct experience of oneness has always been cultivated through a specific practice. The practice of recognizing the self in the other. Not as a performance of spiritual virtue, not as a suppression of the very real human experience of difference, of conflict, of the legitimate pain that other souls can and do inflict, but as a deliberate, sustained, increasingly honest act of perception. The practice of looking at another soul, especially a difficult one, and asking sincerely and without defensiveness, what in this person am I refusing to see in myself? The Akashic records, when accessed in relation to this question, consistently reveal something that initially feels confronting and ultimately feels like the deepest possible relief. The qualities we condemn most fiercely in others are almost always the qualities we have most successfully hidden from ourselves. The fears we project onto other people are almost always the fears we have not yet been willing to fully acknowledge as our own. And the moment a soul sees this, truly sees it, not conceptually but in the lived, embodied, humbling recognition that the mirror has been trying to show them something all along, the karmic charge of the relationship begins to release, not because the other person changed, but because the consciousness doing the perceiving expanded. This is oneness working as a practical technology of soul evolution, not a concept to be believed in, a practice to be lived. the loneliness that oneness dissolves. There is one final truth that the law of oneness carries, and it is the one that perhaps matters most to the modern soul. The Akashic field does not record a single soul in any lifetime, in any culture, in any era of human history who was ever truly alone, not one. Because aloneness, in the deepest sense, the sense of being a consciousness fundamentally cut off from the field of intelligent life that surrounds and permeates it, is not a state that exists in the Akashic record. It is a perception, a consequence of the forgetting that incarnation requires, the temporary narrowing of awareness that allows a soul to experience the world as an individual, to learn through the friction of apparent separation, to develop through the contrast that only the experience of being a seemingly distinct self can provide. But the field is always there. The connection is never severed. The consciousness that underlies all things has never, in any moment of any lifetime of any soul, withdrawn its presence from the one who felt most abandoned by it. You have never been as alone as you have sometimes felt. The universe has been present in every moment you believed it had forgotten you. The Akashic field has held the full record of your soul's journey with perfect completeness through every moment you believed your life had no meaning. And the other souls who share this field with you, who have played every role in your soul's journey across the full arc of your Akashic history, who have loved you and challenged you and wounded you and healed you across more lifetimes than this one mind can hold, they are not separate from you either. They are, in the deepest and most ancient sense, the tradition knows how to articulate, the same consciousness you are, knowing itself through different eyes, learning through different contracts, moving through different chapters of the same vast, purposeful, never-ending story. This is the law of oneness. It is the ground from which every other law in this audiobook grows. And now that you are standing on it, everything that follows will land differently. In the next chapter, we turn to the law that explains why the universe built contrast into the very architecture of existence, why light requires darkness, why growth requires friction, and why the most difficult experiences of your soul's journey are not interruptions to the plan, they are the plan. We turn now to the law of polarity. There is a moment that most people who walk a spiritual path eventually arrive at, and it is not the moment of breakthrough. It is not the moment of awakening or clarity or the sudden deep peace that the books and the teachers and the guided meditations all seem to promise is waiting just around the next corner of inner work. It is the moment when, after everything they have learned, after all the tools they have gathered and the frameworks they have studied, and the genuine, sincere effort they have made to raise their vibration and align with their soul's purpose and release what no longer serves them, something devastating happens anyway. The relationship ends. The health shatters. The thing they worked toward for years collapses. The grief arrives without warning and without mercy. And the spiritual seeker, standing in the rubble of something they genuinely believed they had done everything right to build, asks the question that no amount of positive thinking can fully silence. If I understand the laws, if I am doing the work, if the universe is as intelligent and as compassionate as I have been told it is, why is this still happening? The law of polarity is the Akashic tradition's answer to that question, and it is not a comfortable answer. It is not the answer that tells you the darkness was a mistake, or that the right practice would have prevented it, or that a higher vibration makes you immune to contrast. It is the answer that tells you something far more true, far more ancient, and ultimately far more liberating than any of that. The darkness was not the interruption. It was the instruction. The hermetic principle. The Kybalion, the hermetic text that preserves some of the most precise articulations of cosmic law in the Western esoteric tradition, states the principle of polarity in terms that are simple enough to misread and profound enough to spend a lifetime unpacking. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Read quickly. This sounds like wordplay. Read carefully. It is a precise description of the structure of existence itself. Everything that exists in the Akashic field has a corresponding opposite, not an enemy, not a flaw in the design. A corresponding opposite that is, in the deepest sense, the same thing expressing itself at a different point on the same spectrum. Heat and cold are not two different things. They are two poles of the same spectrum of temperature. Light and darkness are not two different substances. They are two poles of the same spectrum of luminosity. Fear and love, and here is where the Hermetic teaching becomes most radical, are not two different forces at war with each other in the human soul. They are two poles of the same spectrum of awareness. Fear is what love looks like when consciousness has contracted so far from its source that it can no longer recognize what it is. Love is what becomes available when consciousness expands back toward the oneness we explored in Chapter 1. They are not opposites in the sense of being fundamentally different in nature. They are opposites in the sense of being the two ends of the same continuum. And this distinction between opposition as conflict and opposition as spectrum is the key that unlocks the law of polarity in its full depth. What the Akashic records show about contrast, when the records are accessed in relation to the most difficult chapters of a soul's journey, the periods of loss, of failure, of profound disorientation, what consistently emerges is not evidence of a soul being punished or abandoned or left behind by the intelligence of the field. What emerges is evidence of a soul being educated through the most efficient curriculum available to it at that stage of its evolution. Contrast. The Akashic tradition teaches that the soul cannot develop certain qualities, the deepest ones, the ones that actually matter at the level of soul evolution, without the direct embodied experience of their opposite. Not as a concept, not as something read about or observed from a safe distance, but as a lived reality that moves through the body, the emotions, the nervous system, the very cells of the incarnating being. You cannot develop genuine compassion from a position of unbroken comfort. Compassion, real compassion, the kind that the advanced souls who access the records describe as one of the highest vibrational qualities a consciousness can carry, requires the direct experience of suffering, not suffering observed in others, suffering felt in the self, the specific weight of a specific loss, the particular texture of a particular despair, the precise shape of a wound that only that experience could have made, because it is the wound that teaches the soul at a level beyond intellectual understanding what it actually feels like to be in pain, and that embodied knowing, that lived, visceral, irreducible understanding is what makes genuine compassion possible. The compassion of a soul that has been in the dark and found its way back is categorically different from the sympathy of a soul that has only ever read about darkness from the light. The Akashic records make no distinction in value between a lifetime of apparent ease and a lifetime of apparent difficulty. What they measure is not the comfort level of the experience, but the quality of consciousness the soul brought to it and developed through it. The Vedic understanding of contrast as curriculum. The Vedic tradition, in its most sophisticated articulations of cosmic law, described the purpose of polarity through the concept of dvandva, the pairs of opposites that characterize existence in the physical realm: hot and cold, pleasure and pain, success and failure, honor and disgrace. The Bhagavad Gita, one of the foundational texts of Vedic wisdom, returns again and again to the challenge of Dvandva, not as something to be escaped or transcended through spiritual bypass, but as the specific curriculum of embodied existence that the soul agreed to engage with when it chose to incarnate. The teaching is not that opposites should be eliminated. It is that the soul should develop the capacity to remain stable, clear, and conscious in the face of both poles, not unmoved. The tradition is careful to distinguish between the numbness of suppression and the equanimity of genuine wisdom, but not destabilized, not contracted into fear by the cold pole, not inflated into carelessness by the warm one. The Sanskrit term for this capacity is samatvam, evenness of mind, and the Gita is explicit that samatvam is not a natural default of the human psyche. It is a quality cultivated through the direct experience of polarity over many lifetimes, through the specific friction that only the pairs of opposites can provide. The soul does not develop samatvam by avoiding difficulty. It develops it by moving through difficulty so many times, in so many forms, across so many lifetimes, that it finally learns, at the deepest level of its vibrational being, that neither pole of any spectrum has the power to define it. The dark night of the soul as vibrational recalibration. There is a specific experience that the mystics of virtually every tradition, Christian, Sufi, Vedic, Buddhist, hermetic, have described with a remarkable consistency across centuries and cultures. An experience so universal in the landscape of genuine spiritual development that it has earned its own name, the dark night of the soul. Saint John of the Cross, the 16th century Spanish mystic, whose writings gave the experience its most enduring name, described it as a period of profound spiritual desolation in which everything the soul believed it knew about the divine, about itself, about the meaning of its journey, seems to dissolve. The practices that once brought comfort bring nothing. The certainties that once anchored the seeker offer no purchase. The light that once seemed so close recedes until the soul cannot remember what it felt like to be certain of anything at all. Modern spiritual culture has a complicated relationship with the dark night. It is simultaneously romanticized, worn as a badge of spiritual seriousness, and feared, avoided, and when it arrives, treated as evidence that something has gone badly wrong. The Akashic tradition offers a different frame entirely. The dark night of the soul is not a spiritual crisis, it is a vibrational recalibration, and the records, when accessed in relation to these periods, consistently show the same pattern. The dark night arrives at a precise moment in a soul's evolution, not randomly, not as punishment, but as the specific experience the field has determined is necessary to dissolve a vibrational pattern that the soul has outgrown but not yet released. The comfort, the certainty, the sense of spiritual solidity that preceded the dark night were real, but they were also, in some essential way, a form of the soul resting on a level of understanding it had already exceeded. The darkness comes not to destroy what was built, but to make space for what is ready to emerge, to bring the soul into direct contact with the pole of experience it has been carefully, understandably, very humanly avoiding. And in that contact, in the willingness to remain present in the dark, without grasping for premature light, to develop a quality of consciousness that the comfort could not have produced. The dark night is not the absence of the field's intelligence. It is one of its most precise and most compassionate instruments. Why you cannot skip the opposite. Here is the teaching within the law of polarity that the modern spiritual marketplace most consistently fails to deliver, and it is the one that, if genuinely understood, would save an enormous number of sincere seekers an enormous amount of misdirected effort. You cannot vibrate your way out of a lesson that polarity has encoded into your Akashic curriculum Manifestation practices, positive affirmations, high vibrational living, all of these have genuine value within the framework of Akashic Law. The law of vibration is real. Raising your frequency is real. The field responds to what you broadcast. All of that is true, but it is not the whole truth. And the part it leaves out is this. If the soul's Akashic blueprint includes a specific experience of contrast, a specific encounter with a particular pole of a particular spectrum, that experience will find its way into the lifetime in some form. Because it is not an accident. It is not a low vibration attracting low vibration. It is a precisely designed piece of curriculum that the soul's own higher wisdom encoded into the blueprint before incarnation because it understood with a clarity unavailable from within the limitations of a single human lifetime that the lesson encoded in that contrast was exactly what this incarnation needed in order to evolve. The soul that spends its energy trying to manifest its way around a dark night will eventually find that the dark night simply waits. With the patience of a universe that operates outside of Chronos time, with the quiet persistence of a lesson that knows it has not yet been received. This is not a counsel of despair. It is a counsel of a different and more powerful kind of courage. Not the courage that tries to prevent the darkness from arriving, but the courage that, when it arrives, turns to face it. That asks not how do I make this stop, but what is this here to show me? That trusts even inside the most disorienting contrast, that the field which encoded this experience into the blueprint did so with a wisdom and a love that this moment from inside it cannot yet fully see, finding the gift inside the opposite. The hermetic philosophers taught a practice they called mental transmutation, the art of deliberately shifting consciousness from one pole of a spectrum toward the other. Not by denying the reality of the pole you are currently experiencing, not by spiritual bypass or forced positivity, but by understanding at the level of the law that every pole contains within it the full spectrum of which it is a part. This means something practical and something profound. At the practical level, it means that within every experience of loss, the seeds of a specific gain are already present. Not a compensation prize, not a silver lining designed to make the loss feel acceptable, but the specific quality, the compassion, the wisdom, the unshakable strength, the luminous clarity that only the direct experience of this particular loss could have cultivated in this particular soul. At the profound level, it means that the soul, which has moved through the full range of a spectrum, that has known both the cold and the warmth, both the grief and the joy, both the failure and the breakthrough, carries a completeness that a soul which has only ever known one pole cannot possess. The Akashic records of advanced souls, souls approaching the later stages of their evolutionary curriculum, are characterized not by lives of unbroken ease, but by the full, rich, unflinching engagement with the entire spectrum of human experience. The record shows souls who have known profound loss and developed through it an unshakable compassion. Souls who have known profound failure and developed through it an unshakable humility. Souls who have descended into the deepest darkness available to the human experience and emerged carrying a quality of light that could only have been forged there. The diamond is made under pressure. This is not a metaphor. It is the law of polarity, expressing itself in the physical world as a reminder written into the very structure of matter. The most luminous things in existence are made in the conditions that least resemble luminosity. Polarity and the law of vibration. Before we leave this chapter, it is necessary to draw a connection that the Akashic tradition holds as essential and that the modern understanding of vibrational law almost always misses. The law of vibration, as we explored in Part 1, teaches that everything is energy moving at specific frequencies, that the soul broadcasts a vibrational signature and the field responds with experiences that resonate at matching frequencies, that raising your vibration changes what the field mirrors back to you. All of this is true, and all of it operates within the larger framework of the law of polarity. Because vibration does not move in one direction, it oscillates, it moves between poles. That is literally what vibration is, movement between two states. The wave does not exist without both the crest and the trough. Remove either pole and there is no wave, there is no movement, there is no vibration at all. The soul that refuses one pole of its experience, that suppresses its grief, denies its fear, bypasses its darkness, in the rush to maintain a frequency it has decided is spiritually superior, does not raise its vibration. It flattens it. It reduces the amplitude of its wave. And a soul with a flattened wave, however high its median frequency, has less capacity to move through the field with power, with depth, and with the full resonance of a consciousness that has genuinely engaged with the whole of what it means to be alive. The ancient traditions did not celebrate comfort. They celebrated wholeness. And wholeness in every lineage that has ever engaged with the Akashic field with genuine depth always includes the full spectrum. Both poles, both teachers, both sides of every contrast the soul has ever been asked to move through. You were built for the full spectrum. There is a teaching that the Sufi tradition returns to in its poetry, in its music, in the turning of the whirling dervishes who use the spinning of their own bodies as a physical expression of cosmic law. The reed, Rumi writes, cries because it has been cut from the reed bed. Its music is made of longing, its song is born from separation, and it is precisely the wound, the hollow that the cutting created, that makes the music possible. A reed that was never cut from its bed would make no music. It would simply grow, silent and whole and without the specific hollow that transforms breath into song. Your wounds are not evidence that you are broken. They are evidence that you have been shaped, that the law of polarity has been at work in you, cutting the specific hollows that your specific music requires. The Akashic field holds the complete record of every pole you have ever experienced, in every lifetime you have ever lived. Every descent and every ascent, every loss and every recovery, every moment of darkness and every moment of breaking back into the light. And what the records show, when seen in their full scope across the entire arc of a soul's evolution, is not a story of damage. It is a story of refinement. You were not built only for the light. You were built for the full spectrum, for the complete, luminous, unafraid engagement with everything existence offers at both poles of every contrast, because that, the full spectrum consciously inhabited, is what the Akashic tradition has always called wholeness. And wholeness is what every soul, through every law, through every lifetime, through every carefully encoded experience of polarity it has ever moved through, is ultimately evolving toward. In the next chapter, we turn to a law that governs not just what you experience, but when. The law that explains why your energy moves in seasons rather than straight lines. Why your life has rhythms that cannot be forced, only honored. And why the winters of your existence are not punishments for something you did wrong, but preparations for the spring that is already encoded in your Akashic blueprint. We turn now to the law of rhythm. There is a particular kind of suffering that the modern world has made almost universal, and it is not the suffering of loss or grief or failure, though all of those are real and all of them have their place in the Akashic curriculum we explored in the last chapter. It is the suffering of a soul that is in a quiet season, looking at its own stillness and concluding that something has gone wrong. You know this feeling. Most people who are honest with themselves know it intimately. The period where the momentum that was once carrying you forward seems to have simply stopped, where the clarity that once felt so accessible has gone quiet, where the energy that fueled your growth, your relationships, your sense of purpose has retreated somewhere you cannot quite reach, where you are doing everything you were doing before. The practices, the intentions, the work, and the field seems to have stopped responding. And the mind, in the absence of external confirmation that things are still moving, begins to generate its stories, that you have lost something you will not get back, that the growth was temporary, that you were wrong about the path, that other people are advancing while you are standing still, that the stillness is evidence of failure rather than what it almost always actually is. A season, a necessary, intelligently designed, cosmically encoded season of a soul that is between one chapter of its evolution and the next. The law of rhythm is what explains that stillness, and understanding it, truly understanding it at the level where it changes how you relate to your own cycles, is one of the most practically liberating things this entire audiobook can offer you. The universe moves in cycles. The hermetic tradition in the Kabbalion states the principle of rhythm with a precision that is worth sitting with slowly. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. Rhythm compensates. Those two words contain more wisdom about the nature of human experience than most self-help libraries combined. Every swing in one direction is compensated by an equal swing in the other. Every period of expansion is followed by a period of contraction. Every season of outward movement and visible growth is followed by a season of inward movement and invisible preparation, not as punishment, not as evidence that the expansion was unsustainable, but as the structural, cosmically necessary counterpart that makes the next expansion possible. The universe does not move in straight lines. Nothing in nature moves in straight lines. The planets move in ellipses. The tides move in cycles. The seasons turn. The breath moves in and out. The heart contracts and expands. The brain moves through waves of activity and rest. The very electromagnetic field of the earth pulses with a rhythmic frequency that the ancient traditions recognized thousands of years before modern science had instruments sensitive enough to measure it. Rhythm is not a feature of existence, it is the structure of existence. And the Akashic field, which records every movement of every soul across every lifetime, is organized around rhythmic cycles at every scale. From the vast cosmic cycles of the Vedic tradition, the yugas spanning hundreds of thousands of years, down to the precise rhythmic patterns of a single soul moving through the seasons of a single lifetime. What the Vedic tradition understood about sacred time. In part 1, we touched on the Vedic concept of time as cyclical rather than linear. The law of rhythm takes us deeper into that understanding because the Vedic tradition did not simply observe that time moves in cycles. It developed over thousands of years of careful observation and Akashic inquiry, a detailed and remarkably precise map of the rhythmic patterns that govern a soul's experience at multiple scales simultaneously. The concept of the yugas, the 4 great ages of cosmic time that the Vedic tradition describes as moving in a vast cycle from the golden age of Satya Yuga through the declining ages of Treta, Dvapara, and finally Kali Yuga before the cycle resets, is the largest scale expression of this understanding. The soul incarnating in different yugas encounters different qualities of cosmic rhythm, different densities of experience, different rates of spiritual evolution available in the collective field. But the Vedic sages also mapped rhythm at the scale of the individual soul. The concept of dashas, the planetary periods that Vedic astrology uses to describe the rhythmic unfolding of a soul's Akashic blueprint across a single lifetime, is perhaps the most sophisticated map of personal rhythm ever developed by any tradition. Each dasha is a period governed by a specific planetary influence that activates specific threads of the soul's Akashic record. Specific karmic patterns become available for resolution. Specific soul contracts come into their appointed season. Specific qualities of consciousness are called forward by the rhythm of the field. And crucially, each dasha has a natural duration, a season that cannot be rushed, that will not extend beyond its appointed time, and that will yield its specific gifts only to the soul that engages with it on its own terms, rather than trying to force it to behave like a different season. The ancient Vedic astrologers did not use this system to predict fate. They used it to understand rhythm, to help souls recognize which season they were in so that they could work with the intelligence of that season rather than against it. This is the practical heart of the law of rhythm. The 4 seasons of the soul. Across the Vedic, hermetic, indigenous, and Celtic wisdom traditions, the rhythmic cycle of the soul's experience is consistently described in terms of 4 phases, 4 seasons, each with its own quality of energy, its own purpose in the Akashic curriculum, its own specific demands, and its own specific gifts. The first season is the season of expansion. This is the phase most people recognize and most people chase. The period of outward movement, of visible growth, of momentum that seems to carry itself. New beginnings arrive with ease, doors open without being forced. Energy is abundant, and the sense of alignment between inner intention and outer experience creates the feeling of a soul moving in harmony with the current of its own blueprint. The Akashic field in this season is actively reflecting the vibrational work the soul did in the previous cycle. The harvest is arriving, and the soul's task in this season is to move boldly, to plant new seeds at the height of the growing energy, and to receive what the field is offering without the guilt or the disbelief that so many souls carry when things are genuinely going well. The second season is the season of peak. The expansion has reached its natural apex. The harvest is full. The work of this season is integration, to consolidate what has been built, to deepen what has been received, to allow the learning of the expansion phase to move from the surface of experience into the bones of the soul. This is not a dramatic season. It does not look like a breakthrough, but it is essential. The soul that rushes past the peak season in search of the next expansion misses the integration that makes the next cycle possible at a higher level. The third season is the season of contraction, and this is the season that the modern world misreads most catastrophically. The energy begins to withdraw, the outward momentum slows, what once felt effortless begins to require more. The clarity that was once accessible becomes quieter. The field seems less immediately responsive. And if the soul does not understand the law of rhythm, this is the season in which it concludes that something has gone wrong, that it has lost its alignment, that the growth was temporary, that the path has closed. None of that is true. The contraction is not the field withdrawing. It is the field calling the soul inward, toward the specific inner work. The reflection, the release, the deeper honesty about what is no longer serving the evolution of the soul, that cannot be done in the noise and momentum of the expansion. The contraction season is where the real work happens, where the seeds of the next expansion are planted in the dark, in the quiet, in the invisible underground of the soul's preparation. The fourth season is the season of rest and renewal, the deepest point of the inward cycle, the fallow ground, the silence between breaths. This is the season that is most feared and most resisted and most misunderstood. because it offers nothing that the external world recognizes as progress. There is no product, no visible movement, no harvest to point to. There is only the quiet, the stillness, and the invisible but essential process of a soul that is not failing to advance, but resting in the precise way the next advance requires. And then, because rhythm compensates, because the pendulum always returns, always comes back in, the expansion begins again, at a higher level, with a deeper foundation, carrying the integrated wisdom of the full cycle that preceded it. Why forcing the wrong season costs more than it produces. Here is where the law of rhythm becomes not just philosophically illuminating, but immediately practically important. The Akashic tradition is consistent on this point across every lineage that has preserved it. The soul that understands its current season and works with its intelligence will accomplish in one aligned cycle what a soul fighting against its rhythm cannot accomplish in 3. Forcing action in a contraction season is one of the most common and most costly spiritual mistakes available to the modern soul, and it is almost entirely a product of a culture that has declared war on stillness, that measures worth by output, that reads silence as failure and rest as laziness, and the inward turn as avoidance. When a soul is in a contraction season and attempts to force the energy of expansion, to push through the stillness, to manufacture momentum, to produce results that the cycle is not yet positioned to yield, several things happen simultaneously in the Akashic field. The soul depletes the vibrational reserves that the contraction season is designed to replenish. The inner work that the contraction was calling for goes undone, which means it does not disappear. It simply accumulates, waiting for the next contraction season to present itself again, likely with more force. And the forced action, produced without the energetic foundation the natural cycle would have built, tends to yield results that are thinner, less sustainable, and less aligned with the soul's genuine blueprint than the results that the right season, patiently honored, would have delivered. You cannot bully a seed into flowering faster than its nature allows. You cannot force the tide to turn before its time. You cannot make a winter shorter through the force of your desire for spring. But you can use the winter wisely. And this is what the Akashic tradition teaches. You can do in winter what winter is specifically designed to make possible. The deep rest that restores, the honest reflection that clears, the quiet tending of roots that the noise and momentum of summer never allowed, and a soul that learns to use every season for what that season is actually for, rather than spending each one wishing it were a different one, moves through the rhythmic cycle of its Akashic blueprint with a grace and an efficiency that the soul fighting against rhythm will spend many additional lifetimes attempting to develop. Reading your own rhythmic season. The Akashic tradition offers consistent markers by which a soul can begin to identify which season it is currently moving through. Not with the anxious urgency of someone trying to diagnose what is wrong, but with the quiet, honest curiosity of a soul that is learning to read the language the field is speaking to it through the quality of its own experience. The first marker is the quality of your energy, not your mood. Mood is surface weather, shifting constantly in response to external circumstances, but the deeper, more consistent quality of your available energy. Expansion seasons carry a quality of generative aliveness, a sense of capacity, of the soul leaning forward into life. Contraction seasons carry a different quality, not depression, which is a clinical experience with its own causes and its own need for proper care, but a specific turning inward, a quieting, a sense of the soul pulling its attention back from the periphery toward the center. The second marker is the quality of your external momentum. In expansion seasons, the field tends to respond with a speed and a synchronicity that can feel almost electric. Right people appear at right moments. Opportunities align. The effort required feels proportionate. In contraction seasons, the same effort produces less visible result. Doors that should logically open remain closed. The field is not punishing the soul. It is redirecting its energy inward, toward the preparation that the next expansion will require. The third marker is what is asking for your attention beneath the surface of your daily life. Contraction seasons reliably surface what the expansion seasons, in their busyness and momentum, allowed the soul to keep below awareness. The unresolved grief, the honest question about whether the direction still truly serves the soul's blueprint. The relationship dynamic that the motion of expansion allowed to be perpetually deferred. These surfacings are not crises. They are the season doing exactly what it is designed to do, presenting the soul with the specific inner curriculum that this particular fallow period was encoded to deliver. The relationship between rhythm and divine timing. In part 1, we explored the law of divine timing, the understanding that certain experiences are encoded in the soul's Akashic blueprint, with what the ancient traditions described as divine appointments, moments that the field has been building toward through the accumulation of karmic preparation and vibrational readiness. The law of rhythm is, in many ways, the mechanism through which divine timing operates, because the appointed moment, the kairos moment of perfect ripeness, that the ancient Greeks distinguished from ordinary chronos time, does not arrive randomly within the soul's experience. It arrives at a specific point in the rhythmic cycle, almost always at the turn between contraction and expansion, at the precise moment when the deep inner work of the quiet season has produced the specific vibrational readiness the appointed experience requires. This is why so many souls report that their greatest breakthroughs arrived not in their most active, most driven, most effortful seasons, but in the aftermath of their deepest stillness. The relationship that changed everything appeared when they had finally stopped forcing. The clarity that reorganized their entire direction arrived in the quiet after they had released the need to manufacture answers. The opportunity that aligned with the deepest truth of their blueprint emerged when they had stopped chasing a version of their life that the contraction season was quietly, persistently, lovingly dismantling. The field was not withholding. It was waiting for the season to complete its work. It was waiting for the roots to go deep enough to bear the weight of the harvest that was already encoded in the blueprint. And it waited, as we explored in Chapter 1, with a patience that is quite literally infinite. Because the field exists outside of Chronos time entirely. From its perspective, there is no late. There is only the moment of readiness, and the moment of readiness almost always arrives at the turn of a season. Honoring the winter. There is a practice that the indigenous traditions of multiple cultures, the Celtic, the Native American, the ancient Vedic, the Aboriginal Australian, preserved with a consistency that suggests it was understood as essential to the health of the soul across every human civilization that has ever lived close enough to the natural world to observe its rhythms without the buffer of artificial light and central heating. The practice of honoring the winter, not enduring it, not tolerating it while counting the days until spring, but genuinely, consciously, deliberately engaging with what the winter is for. In the Celtic tradition, the winter was understood as the season of the ancestors, the time when the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, when the soul's connection to its deeper history and its longer story was most accessible. The practices of winter were practices of listening, of sitting with what could not be heard in the noise of the growing seasons, of allowing the silence to speak. In the Vedic tradition, the equivalent season, the period of the soul's inward turn in its rhythmic cycle, was understood as the season of tapas, austerity, not in the punitive sense of deprivation, but in the purifying sense of a consciousness voluntarily releasing what it no longer needs, clearing the vibrational field of accumulated residue, making space at the level of the soul's energetic body for the new frequencies that the next expansion would bring. What both traditions understood, what every tradition that has worked deeply with the law of rhythm has understood, is that the winter is not empty. It is not the absence of the growing season. It is a season in its own right, with its own intelligence, its own gifts, and its own specific demands on the soul, willing to honor it. The soul that learns to love its winters, or at minimum to trust them, discovers something that souls who spend their winters in desperate longing for summer never find. That the qualities developed in the quiet season are the qualities that make everything that follows more real, more rooted, more aligned with the deepest truth of the soul's blueprint. The patience developed in the waiting, the honesty that the stillness surfaces, the wisdom that arrives only in the absence of noise, the rootedness that grows in the dark and makes it possible for the soul to stand firm when the winds of the next expansion bring everything it has been waiting for all at once. These are not compensations for the difficulty of winter. They are the gifts of winter, available only to the soul that was willing to remain in it long enough to receive them. You are always in the right season. There is a final teaching within the law of rhythm that the Akashic tradition returns to with particular tenderness, and it is the one that this chapter needs to rest on. The field does not make seasonal errors. The soul that is currently in a contraction season is not in a contraction season because it made a wrong turn or failed to maintain a high enough vibration or missed the window for a different season that was available to better, more spiritually advanced souls. It is in a contraction season because the contraction season is what its Akashic blueprint requires at this precise point in its evolution. The soul that is in a winter is in a winter because winter is what this moment calls for, because the specific inner work encoded in this specific fallow period could not have been reached any other way, because the roots that are growing in the dark right now are the exact roots that the next season's harvest will need. You are not behind. You are not stuck. You are not being left behind by other souls whose seasons appear more abundant, more expansive, more visibly productive than yours. You are in precisely the season that your soul's blueprint placed you in, and the field that encoded that season into your blueprint did so with the same wisdom, the same love, and the same infinite patience that we have encountered in every cosmic law this audiobook has explored. There is a rhythm to your life. There has always been a rhythm to your life. And that rhythm has never, for a single moment, been random. It has been the field speaking to you in the oldest language it knows, the language of season and cycle and tide, the language of expansion and return, the language of a universe that knows that nothing grows in a straight line, and that everything worth growing requires the full turn of the wheel. In the next chapter, we turn to the law that explains why your outer world is not something that happens to you, but something that is constantly, faithfully, and with perfect precision being generated by you. The law that the hermetic tradition encoded in its most famous axiom, the law that once understood makes it impossible to look at your life the same way again. We turn now to the law of correspondence. There is a pattern that almost every sincere seeker eventually notices, and when they first notice it, it tends to produce one of two responses, either a quiet, unsettling recognition that something important is being revealed, or a defensive resistance that is, in its own way, an equally clear confirmation that something important is being revealed. The pattern is this: the circumstances change, the city changes, The relationship changes, the job changes, the social circle changes, the spiritual practice changes. Everything on the surface of the life is rearranged, sometimes radically, sometimes at enormous personal cost. And for a while, sometimes a long while, it seems to have worked. The new circumstances feel different enough from the old ones to create the convincing sensation of genuine change. And then, with a timing that can feel almost cruel in its precision, the same dynamic appears again, not in identical form. The names are different, the setting is different, the specific details are different, but the essential shape of the experience, the quality of the wound, the nature of the pattern, the specific way the soul finds itself stuck or diminished or betrayed or unseen is recognizably, unmistakably the same. And the soul, standing in the middle of a life it rearranged specifically to escape this, asks the question that the law of correspondence has been waiting with infinite patience for it to ask. If I changed everything outside, why is this still here? The answer is the subject of this entire chapter, and it is, in the deepest sense, the most practically important answer this audiobook contains. The axiom that contains everything. The Hermetic tradition, in its characteristic precision, encoded the law of correspondence in a single line that has been preserved across more than 2,000 years of transmission. As above, so below. As within, so without. As the universe, so the soul. 3 couplets, each one pointing to the same structural truth from a different angle. Each one, when understood fully rather than repeated as a spiritual slogan, capable of reorganizing the entire way a soul relates to its own experience. As above, so below. The laws that govern the largest scales of existence, the movement of galaxies, the structure of cosmic cycles, the intelligence of the Akashic field itself, are the same laws that govern the smallest scales. The atom mirrors the solar system. The rhythms of the cosmos are reflected in the rhythms of the body. The structure of the infinite is present in the structure of the particular. There is one set of laws. They operate at every scale simultaneously, and the soul that learns to read those laws at any scale has learned to read them at every scale. As within, so without. This is the couplet that contains the answer to the pattern the soul keeps encountering. What is consistently present in the outer world of a soul's experience is a direct correspondence to what is held in the inner world of that soul's vibrational field, not as a punishment, not as an arbitrary reflection, but as a precise, faithful, impersonal mirror operating according to the same Akashic law that governs everything else in the field. As the universe, so the soul. The soul is not a small, separate thing living inside a large, separate universe. The soul is a microcosm, a complete self-contained expression of the same intelligence that structures the macrocosm. Everything that exists in the universe as a whole exists in miniature, in encoded form within the soul. And the soul's journey of evolution is, at the deepest level, the universe's journey of knowing itself through the experience of a particular, individual, irreplaceable perspective. What the Akashic records reveal about the inner-outer mirror. When the records are accessed in relation to persistent life patterns, the recurring relationship dynamic, the financial pattern that persists across different careers and different circumstances, the specific form of limitation that appears regardless of what the soul does to change its external situation. What consistently emerges is a map, not a map of the outer circumstances, a map of the inner field. The records show with a precision that can initially feel confronting and ultimately feels like the deepest possible relief that every persistent outer pattern has a corresponding inner structure, a belief held at the soul level, an unresolved emotional pattern carried across lifetimes, a vibrational frequency being broadcast from the depths of the soul's Akashic record that is generating with perfect impersonal consistency the outer experiences that resonate at its frequency. The soul that consistently attracts relationships characterized by abandonment is not unlucky. It is not carrying a curse. It is broadcasting from a wound so deep it often predates this lifetime, a vibrational frequency that corresponds to the experience of abandonment. And the field, operating with the same impersonal precision as the law of gravity, reflects that frequency back in the form of experiences that confirm and amplify it. Until the soul finds the inner correspondence, until it locates within its own vibrational field the wound that is generating the broadcast, until it brings to that wound the specific quality of consciousness, the compassionate, honest attention, the willingness to feel what was never fully felt, the genuine understanding of how the pattern was formed and why it has been carried, that begins to shift the frequency at the source. This is not blame. The Akashic tradition is unambiguous on this point. The soul did not choose its wounds. It did not deliberately generate the painful patterns it carries. The inner structures that correspond to the painful outer experiences were almost always formed in the circumstances of genuine difficulty. In lifetimes where the soul was operating with less awareness than it carries now, in experiences of real harm that left real imprints in the vibrational field. But understanding where the pattern came from and understanding that it is the inner pattern, not the outer circumstances, that is generating the corresponding experience is the distinction that makes change possible rather than cosmetic. You cannot change the reflection by rearranging what is in front of the mirror. You change the reflection by changing what the mirror is showing. The 3 planes of correspondence. The Hermetic tradition developed a detailed map of the law of correspondence that identifies 3 distinct planes on which the inner-outer mirror operates simultaneously. Understanding all 3 is essential to working with the law practically rather than superficially. The first plane is the physical plane. This is the most immediately visible level of correspondence, the direct relationship between the state of the physical body and the state of the soul's vibrational field. The ancient healing traditions of virtually every culture, Ayurvedic, Chinese, Egyptian, indigenous, understood illness not primarily as a malfunction of the body, but as a correspondence. As the physical plane's expression of an imbalance or an unresolved pattern held at a deeper level of the soul's vibrational field. This is not a claim that all illness is psychosomatic, in the dismissive modern sense of that term. It is a claim that the body is always, at every moment, expressing the current state of the soul's inner field. That chronic patterns in the physical body, the specific location and nature of persistent tension, illness, or discomfort, correspond in the language of the Akashic field to specific unresolved patterns at deeper levels of the soul's vibrational architecture. The second plane is the mental and emotional plane. This is the level of correspondence that most directly governs the quality of a soul's outer experience, its relationships, its recurring circumstances, its persistent life patterns, the beliefs held at this level, the emotional patterns carried here, the stories the soul tells itself about its own nature and its place in the world, correspond with precise fidelity to the quality of experience the field reflects back. What you believe at the deepest level about your own worthiness will be reflected in the quality of love your life contains. What you carry at the deepest level about the nature of abundance will be reflected in your consistent relationship with material resources. What you hold at the deepest level about safety will be reflected in the degree of ease or chronic tension that characterizes your daily experience. Not as a moral judgment, as a law, as impersonal and as consistent as any other law in the Akashic field. The third plane is the spiritual plane. This is the deepest level of correspondence, the relationship between the soul's current stage of evolution and the quality of its incarnated experience as a whole. A soul in the early stages of its evolutionary curriculum will encounter a quality of outer experience that corresponds to the density and the learning requirements of that stage. A soul approaching the later stages of its evolutionary arc will encounter a quality of outer experience that corresponds to the refinement and the expanding awareness of its current vibrational level. The outer life, in other words, is always an accurate map of where the soul actually is in its evolution, not where it believes it is, not where it wishes it were, but where it actually is, as measured by the field with the same precision it measures everything else. The mirror that shows what we most need to see. There is a teaching within the law of correspondence that appears across the Vedic, hermetic, Sufi, and Buddhist traditions with a remarkable consistency, and it is the teaching that tends to produce the most resistance in the modern spiritual seeker. The things in the outer world that provoke the strongest emotional reactions are the things that correspond most directly to the unresolved inner material the soul most needs to address. Not the mild irritations, not the ordinary frustrations of daily life, but the deep, disproportionate, sometimes overwhelming reactions, the triggers that seem too large for their apparent cause, the patterns of feeling that seem to arrive from somewhere older and deeper than the present moment can fully account for. These are not character flaws. They are not evidence of spiritual inadequacy. They are the law of correspondence operating with particular insistence. The field using the mirror of outer experience to show the soul, with as much clarity as it can manage from within the limitations of a single human lifetime, the specific inner material that is ready to be met. The Hermetic philosophers called this the doctrine of signatures, the understanding that the outer world is perpetually signing to the soul the nature of its inner state. Every persistent outer experience is a signature, a message written in the language of circumstance pointing toward the inner correspondence that generated it. Reading that language, learning to look at the outer mirror not with the defensive question of why is this happening to me, but with the genuinely curious question of what inner correspondence is this showing me, is one of the most powerful practices available to a soul working consciously with its Akashic record. Because the moment the inner correspondence is identified, the moment the soul locates the specific belief, wound, or pattern that is generating the outer experience, the outer experience begins to shift. Not immediately in every case, not without the inner work that genuine transformation requires, but directionally, irreversibly, with the specific quality of shift that comes not from rearranging external circumstances, but from changing the frequency at the source. Why changing the outside without changing the inside produces the same results. The Akashic tradition is not dismissive of external change. Moving to a new city, leaving a harmful relationship, changing a career that has ceased to align with the soul's genuine direction. These are all potentially valid and important external moves. They can create the space for genuine inner transformation. They can remove the soul from circumstances that were actively preventing its growth. But external change without the corresponding inner work produces a specific and entirely predictable result. The same pattern in a new location. Because the field is not generating your experiences from the outside in. It is generating them from the inside out. The vibrational broadcast of the soul's inner field is constant, consistent, and entirely indifferent to the external rearrangements the soul makes in an attempt to escape its own correspondence. You can move continents. The frequency travels with you. You can leave the relationship. The pattern that generated it remains in your field until it is met internally. You can change the career, the city, the social circle, the spiritual practice. And if the inner correspondence remains unchanged, the outer experience will reorganize itself around the same essential shape within whatever new circumstances the soul has moved into. This is not fatalism. It is not a counsel of helplessness. It is the most empowering truth the law of correspondence contains, because it means that genuine change, the kind that actually shifts the pattern rather than just rearranging its setting, is always and entirely within the soul's reach, because the inner field is always accessible. The inner work is always possible. The correspondence that is generating the painful outer pattern can always, with the right quality of honest, compassionate attention, be found. And found, it can be changed, not by forcing it, not by suppressing it or arguing it out of existence, but by bringing to it the specific quality of consciousness, the genuine understanding, the compassionate presence, the willingness to feel what it is carrying all the way through rather than around, that shifts the frequency at the level where the pattern is actually held. Correspondence and the law of vibration. The law of correspondence is, in a fundamental sense, the law of vibration made visible in the structure of a soul's life. In Part 1, we explored the law of vibration, the understanding that everything is energy moving at specific frequencies, that the soul broadcasts a vibrational signature, and that the field responds to that signature with experiences that resonate at matching frequencies. The law of correspondence is what that process looks like when you step back far enough to see the whole picture, when you look not at individual experiences, but at the persistent, recurring structural patterns of a soul's life across years and decades. When you look not at the surface weather of mood and circumstance, but at the climate, the underlying vibrational landscape that shapes everything that grows within it. The vibration the soul broadcasts is the within. The persistent patterns of the soul's outer experience are the without, and the relationship between them is not approximate. It is not directional. It is not sometimes accurate on a good day when the manifestation techniques are working properly. It is exact. It is consistent. It is operating in every moment without exception, whether the soul is aware of it or not. The Vedic tradition described this through the concept of the subtle body, the energetic architecture that underlies the physical body and mediates between the soul's deepest vibrational field and its outer experience. The subtle body carries the imprints of every significant experience, every unresolved emotion, every belief encoded at the soul level across every lifetime the soul has lived, and it broadcasts all of it constantly into the Akashic field, which reflects it back constantly in the form of the corresponding outer experience. Understanding this does not make the inner work easier, but it makes it clearer. It removes the confusion of wondering why the outer world is the way it is, and replaces it with the far more useful inquiry of what the outer world is showing the soul about its inner field. And that inquiry, followed with honesty, with courage, and with the compassionate patience that genuine inner transformation requires, is the most direct path the Akashic tradition knows to changing not just the reflection, but the soul itself. Reading your life as an Akashic message. The ancient hermetic initiates were trained in what their tradition called the reading of the book of nature, the understanding that the physical world, in every detail of its structure, was a continuous message from the intelligence of the cosmic field to the consciousness capable of receiving it. The law of correspondence extends this understanding to the individual soul's life. Your life, in the specific pattern of its recurring experiences, its persistent dynamics, its characteristic joys and characteristic struggles, is a book, written in the language of the Akashic field, addressed specifically and personally to you. The question is not whether it is speaking, it is always speaking. The question is whether the soul has developed the capacity to read it, to look at the pattern of what keeps returning, in relationships, in circumstances, in the specific textures of difficulty and ease, and ask with genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness or despair, What is the inner correspondence that this outer pattern is pointing toward? What do I consistently believe at a level deeper than my conscious thoughts? About love, about safety, about my own worthiness, about whether the universe is fundamentally for me or against me, about whether I am the kind of soul whose blueprint includes genuine fulfillment or merely the perpetual pursuit of it. The answers to those questions are written in the pattern of your outer experience with a precision that no amount of intellectual self-analysis can fully replicate. Because the field does not reflect what you think you believe. It reflects what you actually believe, at the vibrational level where belief is not a thought but a frequency. And reading that reflection honestly, however uncomfortable its accuracy, is one of the most powerful acts of Akashic self-knowledge available to a soul in a human lifetime. The compassion within the law. Before we leave this chapter, it is necessary to say something that the law of correspondence, in its stark precision, can sometimes seem to obscure. The soul that is reading the outer mirror of its life and beginning to identify the inner correspondences that have been generating its painful patterns is not looking at evidence of its failure. It is not looking at proof of spiritual inadequacy or cosmic unworthiness, or a soul that has done something fundamentally wrong. It is looking at the precise, faithful, remarkably detailed record of a consciousness that has been doing its best across many lifetimes, through many difficult circumstances, with the level of awareness available to it at each stage of its evolution, to navigate a curriculum of extraordinary complexity. The wounds that are generating the painful outer patterns were formed in real difficulty. The beliefs that are broadcasting limiting frequencies were installed in circumstances that genuinely warranted them at the time they were formed. The inner structures that now correspond to the outer experiences the soul most wants to change were, at the time of their formation, adaptations, intelligent responses of a consciousness trying to survive and make sense of an experience that exceeded its capacity to integrate. The law of correspondence does not look at those structures with judgment. It looks at them with the same impersonal, compassionate precision it brings to everything. It is not telling you that you are broken. It is showing you where the work is, where the frequency that is ready to change is held, where the next layer of inner transformation is asking for your attention. And that showing, however challenging its content, is in the deepest and most ancient sense of the word, a gift. Your outer world is not your enemy. It is not an arbitrary collection of circumstances that fate has assembled to obstruct you. It is the most honest, most detailed, most precisely calibrated feedback system available to a soul navigating a human lifetime. It is the field speaking to you in the language of your own life, with a fidelity and a specificity that nothing else can match. The only question is whether you are ready to listen. And the fact that you are here asking the questions this audiobook was written to help you ask suggests that you are. In the next chapter, we turn to the law that contains perhaps the most breathtaking promise in the entire Akashic tradition. The law that tells the soul not only that change is possible, but that under the right conditions, the deepest karmic patterns can dissolve, not through suffering, not through years of effortful inner work, but in a single moment of genuine consciousness. The law that the ancient traditions called the highest expression of cosmic intelligence. The law that sits above karma, above polarity, above every other law we have explored. We turn now to the law of grace. There is a moment that some souls encounter once in a lifetime. Others encounter it several times. A few, the records suggest, have spent entire lifetimes in its sustained presence. And every tradition that has ever worked deeply with the Akashic field has attempted, in its own language and its own imagery, to describe it. It is the moment when something that the soul has been carrying, a pattern, a wound, a karmic weight that has persisted across years or decades, or in some cases across multiple lifetimes, simply releases. Not through effort, not through the gradual incremental progress of sustained inner work, though that work may have been what made the moment possible, but in a single breath, a single recognition, a single instant of consciousness so complete, so clear, so utterly without the resistance and the defensiveness and the self-protection that normally mediates the soul's encounter with its own depths, that the pattern that was there one moment is simply gone the next, not suppressed, not managed, not reframed into something more tolerable. Gone. And in its place, something the soul did not manufacture and cannot entirely account for. A lightness, a clarity, a quality of inner freedom that feels less like an achievement and more like a remembering, as though what has been released was never truly the soul's nature to begin with, as though what remains in the absence of the weight is what was always there beneath it. The law of grace is what explains that moment, and understanding it, truly understanding it, not as a theological concept or a spiritual reward for good behavior, but as a precise and operative cosmic law, is perhaps the most liberating thing this entire audiobook can offer. A soul that has been working hard for a long time and wondering whether the working is enough, what grace actually is. The word grace has been so thoroughly absorbed into religious language that recovering its original, precise Akashic meaning requires a deliberate act of unpacking. In most religious frameworks, grace is understood as something dispensed from above, a divine favor extended to the worthy, or in some traditions, the mercifully unworthy, a gift that God or the divine gives to the soul, bypassing the ordinary mechanics of cause and effect because of love or mercy, or the intercession of a saint, or the performance of the correct ritual. Something external to the soul that arrives from outside and acts upon it. The Akashic tradition understands grace differently, not as something external, not as a favor dispensed from a distance, but as a law, as precise, as consistent, and as impersonal as every other law in the Akashic field. A law that operates not above karma or outside of karma, but within the same field of cosmic intelligence that karma inhabits, at a level of that field that karma cannot reach. Here is the distinction that makes everything else in this chapter possible to understand. Karma operates at the level of action and consequence, cause and effect, the Akashic record of what was done and the corresponding experience that the field reflects back until the energetic account is balanced. Grace operates at the level of consciousness itself, not at the level of what was done, but at the level of what is understood, not at the level of the action that generated the karmic imprint, but at the level of the awareness that is now capable of meeting that imprint with a quality of recognition so complete that the energetic charge it carries dissolves. Because the karmic imprint, the vibrational pattern held in the Akashic field, is not primarily a record of the action. It is a record of the consciousness that generated the action, the specific quality of awareness or lack of awareness that was present in the soul at the moment the cause was set in motion. The fear, the ignorance, the contraction, the wound that was operating in the soul when it generated the karma it is now carrying. And when the soul's current level of consciousness genuinely, completely, without remainder transcends the consciousness that generated the karmic pattern, when it understands at the deepest level of its vibrational being, not just intellectually, but in the lived, embodied, irreducible recognition of a soul that has truly arrived at wisdom, the energetic foundation of the karma dissolves. Not because someone forgave the debt from the outside, because the consciousness that generated the debt has evolved beyond the state that made the debt possible. This is grace, not a bypass of cosmic law, the highest expression of it. The teaching across traditions. The law of grace understood in its Akashic, rather than its purely theological dimension, appears with remarkable consistency across every wisdom tradition that has worked deeply with the records. The Buddhist tradition describes it through the concept of prajna, the wisdom that cuts through delusion the way a sword cuts through a knot. Not by untying the knot, thread by thread, through patient incremental effort, but by dissolving the very structure of the knot in a single stroke of clarity so complete that what appeared to be a complex, intractable problem reveals itself to have been, at its root, a misperception. A misperception that the sword of prajna does not correct but simply eliminates. The moment of prajna in the Buddhist framework can dissolve karmic patterns that lifetimes of practice had not resolved. Not because the practice was wasted, the practice was precisely what prepared the ground for the moment of prajna to be possible. But because the liberation itself, when it comes not as the product of effort, but as the flowering of a readiness that the effort cultivated. The Vedic tradition describes grace through the concept of anugraha, the divine favor that flows to the soul not as a reward for merit, but as the natural response of the infinite consciousness to the soul's genuine turning toward its own deepest nature. The Vedic understanding is that the infinite is always already offering its grace, always already present, always already extended toward every soul in every moment. What changes is not the availability of grace, but the soul's capacity to receive it. And that capacity is expanded through the sustained practice of alignment, through the inner work that removes the vibrational obstacles to the soul's recognition of what was always already there. Edgar Cayce, whose thousands of documented Akashic readings remain the most detailed modern record of the law of grace in operation, returned to this theme with a consistency that cannot be coincidental. Across readings for individuals carrying profound karmic burdens, illness, loss, persistent patterns of suffering that reached back through multiple lifetimes, Cayce described grace not as the override of karma, but as its completion. The moment when the soul's understanding of the causes it had set in motion became so genuine, so complete, and so freed from self-justification and blame that the karmic record itself was, in his words, washed clean. Not erased in the sense of being forgotten, the Akashic record retains everything, but cleared of its charge, released of the energetic weight that had been generating its corresponding outer experience, transformed from a wound that was still open to a scar that had fully healed, present in the record as wisdom rather than as suffering still waiting to be resolved. The Christian mystical tradition, in its most sophisticated articulations, described the same process through the theology of metanoia, a Greek word usually translated as repentance but meaning more precisely a complete transformation of mind. Not sorrow for wrongdoing in the punitive sense, but a turning of the entire consciousness so fundamental, so total, so irreversible that the soul that emerges from it is genuinely different from the soul that entered it. And that genuine transformation of consciousness is what the tradition understood as the mechanism of redemption, not the performance of prescribed rituals, not the accumulation of merit, but the real, lived, irreducible turning of a soul away from the consciousness that generated its suffering and toward the consciousness that the infinite has always been inviting it into. Different languages, different cultural frameworks, one law, the role of forgiveness. Of all the mechanisms through which the law of grace operates in a human lifetime, none is more consistently described across the Akashic traditions as powerful, and none is more consistently misunderstood than forgiveness. Modern culture has reduced forgiveness to a psychological practice, something you do for your own well-being, a way of releasing the resentment that is harming you more than the person who wronged you. And while this understanding is not wrong, it is so far from the full Akashic depth of what forgiveness actually is and does that it might as well be describing a different phenomenon entirely. In the framework of Akashic Law, genuine forgiveness, not the performed forgiveness of someone saying the words while still carrying the charge, not the spiritual bypassed forgiveness of someone who has decided to forgive without actually feeling what the wound contains, is one of the most powerful vibrational acts available to a soul in a human lifetime, because genuine forgiveness operates directly at the level of the Akashic record. When a soul has been harmed by another, the Akashic field records not just the action of the one who caused the harm, but the energetic relationship between the two souls in the aftermath. The resentment, the unforgiveness, the continued carrying of the wound, these are not morally neutral states in the framework of Akashic Law. They are vibrational tethers, energetic connections between the two souls that keep both of them bound to the vibrational frequencies of the original harm, keep both of them in a field where consciousness creates experience, continuing to generate and receive experiences that correspond to the frequency of that unresolved wound. This is why the ancient traditions were unanimous that forgiveness benefits the one who forgives at least as much as the one who is forgiven, not as a psychological comfort, but as an Akashic law. The soul that releases the tether of unforgiveness literally changes its vibrational broadcast. It removes from its field a frequency that was generating corresponding experiences of harm, of betrayal, of the specific quality of woundedness that the unforgiveness was perpetuating. And the soul that releases the tether does something else as well, something that goes beyond its own healing. It closes a karmic loop that, left open, would have continued to bind both souls together across further lifetimes until the loop was finally closed through some other mechanism. Genuine forgiveness is, in the Akashic framework, one of the most efficient karmic resolvers available. It does in a single act of consciousness what lifetimes of karmic working through might otherwise require. But, and the tradition is equally clear on this, it must be genuine, it must be real, it must be the forgiveness of a soul that has fully felt what the wound contains, that has not minimized or spiritually bypassed or performed healing it has not actually arrived at, that has moved through the full, honest human experience of having been harmed and come out the other side into a genuine release of the energetic charge. That forgiveness, the real kind, the hard kind, the kind that costs the soul something genuine in the arriving at, is not a psychological practice. It is a law of grace in action. Gratitude as a vibrational accelerant. The Akashic tradition identifies another mechanism through which the law of grace operates in daily life. One that is less dramatic than the transformative moment of total karmic release, but no less real in its consistent, cumulative effect on the soul's vibrational field. Gratitude. Not gratitude as a performance, not the gratitude journal maintained as a spiritual technique, while the soul's genuine emotional state remains somewhere entirely different. But genuine gratitude, the real, felt, sometimes surprising recognition of the specific gifts that the specific chapter of a soul's life has actually contained. In the framework of Akashic Law, genuine gratitude operates as a vibrational accelerant because it does something precise and powerful to the soul's frequency. It shifts the soul's perception of its own Akashic record from the frame of deficit, what has been missing, what has gone wrong, what has been lost, to the frame of sufficiency, of the genuine, specific, irreplaceable value of what has actually been present in the life. And that shift of frame, when it is real rather than performed, corresponds to a shift in the soul's vibrational broadcast. The soul that genuinely perceives the gifts in its experience is broadcasting at the level of the Akashic field a frequency that corresponds to a different quality of experience than the soul that genuinely perceives only the losses. The hermetic tradition described this through the principle of mental transmutation, the understanding that consciousness has the capacity to move along the spectrum of any polarity, and that the deliberate, practiced movement toward the pole of genuine recognition and appreciation is one of the most consistent vibrational accelerants available to a soul not yet ready for the larger moments of grace, but actively cultivating the inner conditions that make those moments possible. Edgar Cayce's readings consistently identified gratitude, along with genuine service to others, as one of the primary practices by which souls accelerated their movement through their karmic curriculum. Not because gratitude makes the universe like you more, but because genuine gratitude changes the frequency of the soul's broadcast in a way that changes what the field mirrors back, which changes the quality of experience available to the soul in its next cycle of expansion, which over time creates the inner conditions for the larger moments of grace to find the soul ready to receive them. When grace applies, and when karma must still be walked. The Akashic tradition does not teach that grace is universally available as a shortcut around the full curriculum of karmic learning. To understand the law of grace accurately, it is necessary to understand the specific conditions under which it operates and the specific situations in which karma must still be walked through experientially before its lesson is complete. Grace in the Akashic framework operates when consciousness has genuinely arrived at the understanding that the karma was encoding. When the soul has truly learned, not intellectually, not as a concept it can articulate, but at the level of lived, embodied, irreducible knowing, what the karmic pattern was there to teach. In those moments, the karma has already served its evolutionary purpose. The lesson it was carrying has been received. The consciousness it was designed to cultivate has been developed. And the Akashic field, which is not a punitive system and has never been interested in suffering for its own sake, releases the pattern because it has already achieved what it was encoded to achieve. But when the lesson has not yet been genuinely received, when the soul's relationship to its karmic pattern is still one of avoidance or suppression or intellectual acknowledgement without the deeper embodied integration that genuine understanding requires, the karma will continue to present itself, not out of cosmic cruelty, out of cosmic intelligence, because the field understands, with a wisdom the soul cannot always access from within the limitation of a single lifetime, that the lesson is not yet complete. The distinction is this: grace does not bypass the curriculum, it completes it. The soul that has genuinely arrived at the understanding a karmic pattern was encoding has not avoided the lesson. It has mastered it, and mastery in the Akashic framework is the only condition under which grace dissolves what suffering alone could not. This is why the ancient traditions consistently taught that the path to grace moved through honest engagement with karmic reality rather than around it. The meditation practices, the shadow work, the genuine, courageous, sometimes brutal, honest examination of the patterns the soul has been carrying and the wounds that generated them. These are not alternatives to grace. They are the specific inner work that prepares the ground in which grace becomes possible. You do not earn grace, but you can, through the quality of your conscious engagement with your own Akashic record, become the kind of soul that grace can reach. The moment of genuine understanding. There is a quality that the Akashic tradition identifies across every description of the law of grace in operation. A quality that distinguishes the moment of genuine karmic release from every approximation of it that preceded the real thing. It is the quality of completeness, the moment of genuine understanding, the moment when the law of grace activates and the karmic pattern dissolves, carries a specific feeling that the soul recognizes immediately and unmistakably. Not because it has felt it before, in most cases it has not, at least not at this depth, but because it corresponds to something the soul knows at the level of its most fundamental nature. It feels like coming home, not the relief of a burden set down, though it is that, not the peace of a conflict resolved, though it is that too, but something deeper than either, a quality of recognition, of the soul seeing for the first time with full clarity something it has always at its deepest level known but has been unable to fully access through the distortion of the wound it was carrying. The Sufi tradition describes it as the lifting of the hijab, the veil between the soul and the direct perception of its own divine nature. The Buddhist tradition describes it as the removal of the klesha, the mental affliction or obscuration that prevented the soul from perceiving clearly. The Vedic tradition describes it as the burning away of the avidya, the fundamental ignorance about the soul's own nature that is the ultimate root of all karma. Different descriptions of the same moment, the moment when the soul sees itself, its patterns, and its entire Akashic history from the perspective of the field rather than from within the wound. And from that perspective, the perspective of the field, which has always known the full story, which has always held the complete record, with perfect compassion and perfect patience, everything looks different. The harm that was done is seen not from the contracted perspective of the one who was wounded, but from the vast perspective of a consciousness that understands the full Akashic context of why it happened and what it was designed to produce. The harm that was caused is seen not from the tortured perspective of a soul drowning in guilt, but from the clear perspective of a consciousness that understands what it was carrying when it caused harm and genuinely, completely without remainder, has moved beyond that consciousness. And in both cases, in the seeing, in the genuine arrival at that perspective, the charge dissolves, the weight lifts, the pattern releases. Not because the past was undone, it was not. The Akashic record retains everything, but because the soul's relationship to the past has been fundamentally and irreversibly transformed. And the field, which generates the soul's outer experience, not from what happened, but from the vibrational frequency the soul is currently broadcasting in relation to what happened, responds to that transformation with immediate and precise fidelity. The reflection changes because the soul has changed. That is the law of grace, invoking grace consciously. The ancient traditions that worked most deeply with the Akashic records preserved specific practices designed not to force the law of grace, which cannot be forced, only prepared for, but to cultivate with consistency and sincerity the inner conditions in which grace is most likely to find the soul ready. The first practice is the practice of honest self-examination, not the self-examination of the inner critic, which is not examination but punishment, and which moves the soul further from grace rather than toward it, but the compassionate, unflinching, genuinely curious examination of the patterns the soul is carrying, the willingness to look without self-justification and without self-condemnation at the inner correspondence that the outer mirror is showing, to ask sincerely and without defensiveness, what am I still carrying? What have I not yet been willing to fully feel? What understanding have I been approaching intellectually without yet arriving at in the bones of my experience? The second practice is the practice of genuine forgiveness, not performed forgiveness, not forgiveness as a spiritual obligation or a psychological technique, but the patient, sometimes slow, sometimes non-linear process of bringing honest, compassionate attention to the wounds that are held in the field, of allowing them to be felt fully and without bypass, of moving through them rather than around them, and of arriving through that full, honest engagement at the genuine release of the energetic tether, not because the harm was acceptable, but because the soul has understood at the level of Akashic Law rather than personal emotion what the harm was there to teach, and has chosen with full awareness of what that choice costs and what it liberates to release the charge it was carrying. The third practice is the practice of radical acceptance, not acceptance in the passive, resigned sense of simply tolerating what cannot be changed, but acceptance in the deep, active, profoundly courageous sense of the Vedic concept of Ishvara Pranidhana, the offering of the soul's entire experience, including its most painful chapters, to the intelligence of the field. The recognition that every experience encoded in the Akashic record, every pattern the soul has carried, every harm it has experienced and caused, has been held within the larger intelligence of a field that understands the full context. And the willingness to trust that intelligence, not because the pain was not real, but because the soul has reached the stage of its evolution where it can hold the pain and the trust simultaneously without one canceling the other. The soul that practices these three consistently, honest self-examination, genuine forgiveness, and radical acceptance, is not performing acts of spiritual virtue. It is preparing the soil, clearing the inner ground, removing layer by patient layer the vibrational obstacles that stand between the soul and the moments of grace that the Akashic field is always, in every moment, extending toward it. And the field, which has always known the full story, which has always held the soul's complete record with infinite patience and infinite love, responds to that preparation with the same law. It responds to everything with perfect precision, perfect fidelity, perfect and absolute consistency. Grace, when the soul is ready for it, does not delay. You have always been eligible. There is a final teaching within the law of grace that the Akashic tradition returns to with a tenderness that feels when it is encountered in the records like the most important thing that has been said in a very long time. There is no soul in the Akashic field that has accumulated too much karma for grace to reach. There is no wound too deep, no pattern too entrenched, no karmic history too complex, no lifetime too painful for the law of grace to be operative. The field does not maintain a list of souls for whom grace is not available. The infinite consciousness that underlies the Akashic record does not grade souls on a scale of eligibility. Grace is not a privilege for the spiritually advanced. It is a law. And like every law in the Akashic field, it operates without exception, without preference, and without the exclusions that human systems of justice and worthiness invariably construct. What determines the soul's access to grace is not the weight of its karmic history. It is the quality of its current consciousness. And the quality of consciousness is always, in every soul, at every stage of its evolution, in every moment of every lifetime, capable of movement, of expansion, of the incremental, sometimes sudden, always irreducible growth toward the genuine understanding that the law of grace requires. The soul carrying the heaviest karma is not further from grace than the soul carrying less. It is simply in a different chapter of the same journey, a chapter that, like every chapter in every soul's Akashic record, is moving, however it appears from within it, toward the same destination. The moment of genuine understanding, the moment of complete recognition, the moment when the soul sees itself and its entire history from the perspective of the field that has always known its deepest nature and has never, for a single moment, confused the pattern the soul was carrying with the soul itself. That moment is not reserved for the few. It is encoded in the Akashic blueprint of every soul without exception, as the destination toward which every law, every lesson, every carefully designed experience of this entire extraordinary journey has always been pointing. You are not excluded from grace. You have never been excluded from grace. You are a soul in the process of becoming ready to receive it. And the field that has held your complete record since the first moment of your existence, that has witnessed every cause you ever set in motion and every effect you ever experienced, that has carried the full weight of your history with a patience and a love that extends far beyond what any single human lifetime can perceive. That field has never stopped extending it toward you, not as a reward for getting it right, as a law, as the deepest, most ancient, most indestructible expression of what the cosmos at its most fundamental level actually is. In our final chapter, we arrive at the place this entire audiobook has been moving toward. Not a new law, but a doorway. The practical, lived, immediately accessible invitation to stop understanding the Akashic records from the outside and begin working with them from within your own experience. To take everything you have learned across both volumes of this journey and bring it into the most important conversation available to a soul in a human lifetime. The conversation with your own record. We turn now to the final chapter, accessing your own Akashic records. There is a misunderstanding about the Akashic records that has persisted across centuries of spiritual teaching and has, in its persistence, kept more souls from the direct experience of their own records than perhaps any other single misconception in the entire tradition. The misunderstanding is this, that the records are somewhere else, that they exist in a realm separate from ordinary human experience, accessible only through extraordinary means, available only to those with special gifts or years of advanced training or the particular frequency attunement of a born psychic or a lifetime dedicated mystic, that the average soul moving through the ordinary texture of a human life is fundamentally on the outside of something that a select few have managed to get inside of. This misunderstanding is understandable. It is the natural conclusion of a culture that has taken the language of the mystics, who describe their experiences of the records in the most vivid, extraordinary imagery available to them, and read those descriptions literally rather than pointing toward the precise, practical truth they were encoding. The mystics were not describing a place. They were describing a quality of attention, and the quality of attention that accesses the Akashic records is not the exclusive property of the specially gifted. It is not locked behind an initiation that only the few can pass through. It is not a frequency available only to souls who have spent decades in contemplative practice. It is the quality of attention that every human soul, in its most honest, most present, most genuinely self-aware moments, already knows how to find. You have been in your records before, many times. You simply did not have a framework for recognizing what you were accessing when you were there. What accessing your records actually means. Accessing your Akashic records is not primarily a visual or narrative experience. It is not for most souls a cinematic sequence of past life memories playing like a film behind closed eyes. It is not the reception of a detailed verbal download of your soul's history and purpose delivered in precise, unambiguous language. For most souls, most of the time, accessing the records feels like something quieter and more intimate than that. More like a deepening, a quality of knowing that arrives not from outside the self, but from a level of the self that is normally obscured by the noise and momentum of ordinary thinking, a sense of recognition rather than revelation, of something that was always true, becoming, in this moment, clearly and undeniably felt. The Akashic tradition describes this as moving from the surface mind to the soul mind, from the level of consciousness that processes experience through the filter of the personality, its fears, its preferences, its habitual interpretations, to the level of consciousness that perceives experience directly, without that filter, from the perspective of the soul's accumulated wisdom across the full arc of its Akashic history. It is the difference between looking at your life through the eyes of the personality and looking at your life through the eyes of the soul. And the shift between those two perspectives, when it happens genuinely, is one of the most recognizable and most unmistakable experiences available to a human consciousness. You will know it not because it looks like anything you expected. You will know it because it feels more true than almost anything you have felt before. Recognizing an Akashic response. A natural and important question arises. How do I know the difference between a genuine response from my Akashic record and the ordinary activity of my own mind producing what it thinks I want to hear? The Akashic tradition offers several consistent markers that distinguish genuine field responses from the mind's own fabrications. The first marker is the quality of surprise. Genuine Akashic responses almost always contain something the ordinary mind did not expect, something that runs counter to the personality's existing story or its preferred interpretation, something that is, in its honest precision, slightly uncomfortable. The mind, when it fabricates spiritual experiences, tends to confirm what it already believes and flatter what it already wants. The field tends to show the soul what it needs to see, which is not always the same thing. The second marker is the quality of simplicity. Genuine impressions from the Akashic field tend to arrive not as elaborate explanations, but as simple, clear, direct knowings. A single word that carries more meaning than a paragraph. An image that communicates a complete understanding in one moment of perception. A feeling that conveys, without verbal elaboration, a quality of truth that the verbal mind then spends considerable time attempting to articulate. The mind, by contrast, tends to produce elaborate, qualified, heavily reasoned responses that loop back on themselves. Genuine Akashic impressions do not loop, they land. The third marker is the quality of persistence. A genuine Akashic communication, even if it arrives once and is not immediately understood, tends to return, in different forms, through different gateways, with a patient consistency that the mind's one-off productions typically lack, if the same essential message is arriving through multiple channels. Through a meditation, through a journaling session, through a dream, through a conversation with a stranger that seems to contain the same essential content as all the others. The tradition identifies that convergence as a reliable indicator of genuine field communication. The fourth and most important marker is what the tradition calls the quality of resonance. When a genuine Akashic impression lands in the soul's awareness, it produces a specific physical sensation, a quality of recognition in the body, a sense of something settling into place rather than arriving from outside, a feeling that this is true rather than this is interesting. The personality can manufacture the feeling of interest. It can manufacture the feeling of excitement. It struggles to manufacture the specific, quiet, unmistakable feeling of the soul, recognizing something it has always known. When that feeling arrives, and it will, with practice, become increasingly familiar, trust it, even if what it is recognizing is something the mind finds uncomfortable or inconvenient or inconsistent with the story it has been telling. Especially then, your life as your primary record. Here is the understanding that this entire final chapter has been building toward. The understanding that the Akashic tradition's most experienced readers return to with the greatest consistency when asked what the most important thing they have learned about working with the records actually is. The most accessible version of your Akashic record is not in a meditative state or a journaling session or a dream. It is in the pattern of your life, exactly as it is right now. Everything that has been consistent in your experience, the quality of your relationships, the nature of your recurring challenges, the specific forms of joy and the specific forms of limitation that have characterized your journey, is already a reading of your Akashic record. Already the field showing you, in the most direct and immediately available language it has, the vibrational signatures, the karmic patterns, the soul contracts, the evolutionary curriculum, and the specific gifts and wounds of your soul's particular journey. You do not need to enter a special state to begin reading this. You need to develop the quality of honest, compassionate, genuinely curious attention that can look at the ordinary texture of your daily experience and ask consistently and sincerely the question that every law in both volumes of this audiobook has been pointing toward. What is this showing me? Not why is this happening to me? Not how do I make this stop? Not what spiritual technique will help me manifest a different experience. What is this showing me about my inner field, about the frequency I am broadcasting, about the karmic pattern that is asking for conscious attention, about the soul contract that is approaching its completion point, about the rhythmic season I am currently in, about the correspondence between what I am carrying inside and what the field is reflecting back? That question, asked honestly and followed wherever it leads, with the courage to receive answers that the personality might find uncomfortable, and the patience to sit with what cannot be resolved in a single session, is the most direct, most powerful, most immediately accessible form of Akashic reading available to a soul in a human lifetime. You do not need a reader. You are the reader. You do not need a library. You are the library. The records are not stored somewhere outside of your experience, waiting to be unlocked by the right technique or the right practitioner. They are written in real time, in the full living texture of your experience, in every pattern that persists, in every relationship that carries weight, in every dream that refuses to be forgotten, in every moment of inexplicable recognition and every moment of inexplicable resistance, in every quality of feeling that seems to come from somewhere older and deeper than this lifetime alone can account for. That is your record. It is already open. It has always been open. The only question that remains is the one this audiobook, across both of its volumes, has been preparing you to ask with full consciousness and full courage. What does it say? Signs that your records are speaking. As a final gift to the soul that is beginning this practice, the Akashic tradition offers a map of the most common signs that the field is actively communicating through the ordinary texture of daily experience. Not extraordinary phenomena, not dramatic supernatural events, the quiet, consistent, easily overlooked signals of a universe that has always been in conversation with you and that responds always to the soul's genuine willingness to listen. The first sign is synchronicity, the experience of meaningful coincidence that the analytical mind wants to dismiss as chance, but that the soul recognizes as something else entirely. The right book appearing at the right moment. The conversation with a stranger that contains the exact answer to the question the soul has been carrying. The repeated appearance of a specific symbol, word, or theme across unrelated contexts. The Akashic tradition does not understand synchronicity as magic. It understands it as the natural result of a soul that has shifted its vibrational frequency toward genuine receptivity. The field has always been generating these convergences. The soul that is paying attention simply begins to notice what was always there. The second sign is the persistent return of a specific theme. When the same essential question, challenge, or invitation keeps presenting itself across different contexts, different relationships, different areas of the life. The tradition identifies this as the field's most direct and most patient communication. The record is presenting a specific piece of curriculum, returning with it again and again, until the soul develops the consciousness to fully receive what it is offering. The third sign is the quality of felt knowing. The moments when a soul simply knows something it has no ordinary means of knowing, not as a dramatic psychic event, but as a quiet, clear, entirely unadorned sense of truth that arrives without reasoning and without the personality's usual need to qualify and elaborate. These moments are not the soul's imagination. They are the record's most direct form of communication with a consciousness that has temporarily quieted enough to receive it. The fourth sign is the experience of recognition in relationship, the inexplicable feeling of already knowing a soul. you have just met. The sense of a history with another person that far exceeds the duration of this lifetime's acquaintance. The quality of certain conversations that feel less like an exchange of new information and more like the continuing of a discussion that was already well underway. These are the soul contract signatures explored in Part 1, making themselves felt in the ordinary experience of a soul that has become sensitive enough to notice them. The fifth sign is the body's response to truth. The specific physical sensation, often described as a quality of settling, of rightness, of something clicking into place in the chest or the gut, that accompanies the genuine recognition of an Akashic truth. The body, in the framework of the Akashic tradition, is not separate from the soul's record. It is one of its most immediate and most honest expressions, and it communicates its recognitions when the soul is paying attention, with a directness and a reliability that the verbal mind cannot always match. The conversation that continues. There is one final thing that needs to be said as this audiobook reaches its close. Something that the Akashic tradition says not as a teaching, but as a reminder. Not as something new, but as something the soul that has traveled through both volumes of this journey is now, perhaps for the first time, genuinely ready to hear. The Akashic records are not a destination. They are not a problem to be solved or a mystery to be finally, definitively cracked. They are a relationship, a living, dynamic, perpetually evolving relationship between a soul and the field that holds its complete history, its deepest nature, and its most direct path forward. And like every genuine relationship, it deepens through consistency, through the willingness to show up again and again in the quality of honest, open, genuinely receptive attention that the field responds to, through the courage to receive what the record shows even when it is not what the personality wanted to hear, through the growing trust built over time, through the direct experience of the field's consistent, intelligent, compassionate responsiveness, that this relationship is safe, that the record holds not judgment but wisdom, not condemnation but the specific, precise, always purposeful guidance of a field that has always known your soul completely and has always, in every law and every law's expression, been directing you home. You began this audiobook as a soul seeking to understand the laws that govern its journey. You are ending it as a soul that has begun, perhaps, to recognize that it was never outside those laws looking in. You were always inside them, always being carried by them, always, in every experience this lifetime has contained, being shown by them something essential about the nature of your own extraordinary, irreplaceable, cosmically significant soul. The records have always known you. Now a little more, you are beginning to know yourself. And that, across every tradition, in every era, in every culture that has ever glimpsed the living intelligence of the cosmic laws, has always been where the real journey begins. Not at the end of the search. At the moment the soul finally understands that what it has been searching for has been searching for it, with the same love, with the same patience, with the same absolute, unshakable, infinite faithfulness, since the very first moment it existed. Before you go, leave a comment below and tell me which law spoke to you most deeply in this volume. Whether it was the law of grace, the law of correspondence, the law of rhythm, or something else entirely, your response matters. Not just to me, but to every other soul who finds this video and reads the thread of what this community is discovering together. Your words may be exactly the thing another soul needed to hear today. And if you have not yet subscribed, if you found your way to this video through a search or a share, or what you now understand was never really an accident, consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because this conversation is not finished. The Akashic tradition is vast. The laws are many, and there is more of this journey still to come. The field brought you here for a reason. Stay close.